When I first moved into the apartment, I was craving silence. My old place had been in the heart of the city, constant sirens, shouting, and the hum of traffic all night long. Here, in this dilapidated building nestled on a quiet street, everything seemed muted. The walls were thick, the floors creaked with age, and the air smelled faintly of dust and forgotten memories. It was the kind of silence you could only find in a place forgotten by time. The landlord mentioned the building was old, but he didn't seem to care much. "A lot of history here," he said. "Some tenants come and go, but most of them are long-term." He didn't mention much about the neighbors, though, only that the apartment next to mine had been vacant for years. "No one's been there in ages," he shrugged. I was glad. A quiet apartment in a quiet building was exactly what I needed. But the first night, as I lay in bed, that silence was shattered by a faint, soft whisper. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't traffic. It was something, someone, speaking just on the other side of the wall. The words were too low to hear clearly, but the tone was unmistakable. A quiet, urgent murmur. I assumed it was just my imagination. But the whispers didn't stop. They returned each night, faint at first, then louder, as though something was trying to reach me. The apartment building felt like something out of a forgotten era. It was a relic from the 1950s, a time when things were built to last, though now the paint was peeling and the floors had started to bow. The hallway was narrow, lined with faded wallpaper that had once been elegant, but now looked tired and worn. The creaky wooden stairs led up to the second floor, where my apartment was located. Every step groaned underfoot, as if the building itself was groaning with age. Most of the tenants were older, recluses of some kind. I didn't see many of them, but I knew they were there. I'd pass them in the hall on rare occasions, but our interactions were always brief. A smile, a nod, and then we went our separate ways. There was something about their eyes, though, pale, distant, as if they were always looking past you, through you. None of them made small talk. None of them seemed interested in anything beyond their own little worlds. My unit was small but functional. The kitchen was cramped, the cabinets faded with years of use, and the bathroom felt like something out of a horror movie. Tub rusted and cracked, tiles missing from the wall. But it was mine, and it was quiet. More than anything, that was what mattered. I was starting over, a fresh start, away from the chaos of the city, away from the noise that had made my life unbearable. I had only been living there for a few days when the whispering started again. It wasn't much at first, just a soft murmur, something barely audible against the thin wall. But the next night, it was louder. I could hear the words more clearly now, though they still sounded jumbled and incomprehensible, like a conversation between people speaking too fast for me to follow. The whispers seemed to be coming from the vacant apartment next door. I pressed my ear against the wall, holding my breath, trying to hear. But the only thing I could catch was a name, just one word repeated over and over. Eleanor. Curiosity gnawed at me. I knocked on the wall, hoping to get a response, but the voices stopped immediately, leaving a stillness that felt even more oppressive. My heartbeat quickened as I pulled my hand away, staring at the spot where the voices had been. The next day, I couldn't help myself. I walked next door and knocked on the door of the vacant apartment. The landlord had told me no one lived there, but maybe someone had moved in without his knowledge. The door was old, with peeling paint around the edges, and when I turned the handle, I found it locked. As I stood there, feeling foolish, a voice called out from behind me. It was Mrs. Harrington, the older woman who lived a few doors down. She always seemed to be watching me, always giving me a tight-lipped frown whenever our paths crossed. "You're wasting your time," she said, her voice stern. "No one's lived there in years." "I thought I heard something," I said, a little embarrassed. "Voices, maybe." Her eyes darkened, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Keep your head down. Don't ask questions. And whatever you do, don't knock on that door again." That night, the whispering returned. Only this time it wasn't soft, muffled murmurs. It was loud, clear enough for me to understand. I sat up in bed, heart racing, straining to make out the words. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was speaking to me, or at least trying to. "Help me." The voice was faint but desperate, the tone trembling as if in fear or pain. I froze, staring at the wall. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I whispered back, half expecting no response, but hoping somehow that the voice would speak again. There was nothing. Silence, absolute and suffocating. I lay back down, telling myself it was all in my head. The building was old, creaky, and the pipes were probably just settling. That had to be it, right? But the whispering didn't stop. It came every night, growing louder, growing more frantic. Sometimes I could make out the words. Other times the voice would repeat the same plea. "Help me." I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't right. The apartment was small, and the layout wasn't much to speak of. There was the living room with its worn-out couch and the kitchen where the smell of stale food never seemed to go away. I could hear the echoes of my own steps as I walked across the floor, and when I tried to sleep, the creaks of the building kept me awake. It felt like the place was alive, breathing with me. But the worst part wasn't the silence between the whispers. It was the sensation that something was watching me. Sometimes when I passed the door to the vacant apartment, I could feel a cold chill creep up my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, and I'd hurry past, afraid to look in. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, waiting for something or someone. I started to notice strange things happening around the apartment. Nothing big, but little things that set my nerves on edge. The radio would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, static crackling through the speakers. Dishes would shift on the counter, the sound of glass scraping against glass waking me from a half-sleep. But it wasn't just objects. The air would grow thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. One evening, I was sitting in the living room trying to distract myself with a book. I needed a break from the whispers, something to ground me. But it didn't work. The tension in the air was palpable. It was like the building itself was holding its breath. That's when it happened. The floor beneath me shuddered. I felt it before I heard it, a sudden, violent tremor that sent a chill through my bones. The building groaned like an old ship in a storm, and the walls rattled so hard I thought they might crack open. It was as if the entire apartment had been jolted into motion, like the world around me had come to a screeching halt. Everything on the floor, books, papers, even the small table beside my chair, shifted, sliding in one smooth motion as though the building had suddenly braked hard, like a car stopping abruptly. The dishes in the kitchen rattled violently, the sound of them skittering across the counter like marbles, some of them nearly toppling over. A piercing scream, high and raw, sliced through the air, so sharp it felt like it was inside my skull. I jumped up, my pulse pounding in my ears. The tremor was over in an instant, but the air was thick with unease. I rushed into the kitchen, where the mess was now scattered across the floor. Everything had moved. Cups had slid off counters. A chair had shifted several inches, as if someone or something had knocked into it with great force. But there was no one there. I stood there for a moment, trembling, trying to make sense of it. The scream, the tremor, everything felt wrong. My mind raced, searching for any logical explanation, but there was none. Just a deep, gnawing sense of dread. I spent the rest of the night pacing, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Sleep didn't come. The whispers continued, louder and more frantic, until it felt like my mind was unraveling. Each whisper felt like a threat, each voice a demand. The following morning, I ventured out into the hallway, trying to get some sense of what was happening. I wasn't the only one who had heard the noise. The tenants, those few who ventured out, seemed more withdrawn than usual. Their eyes were wide with fear, and none of them would meet my gaze. I tried to ask one of them, Mr. Lee, a middle-aged man who lived 2 doors down. He had always been friendly, but this time, his expression was distant, like he wasn't really seeing me. "Did you hear that last night?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. He just looked past me, shaking his head. "No," he muttered, his voice low. "No, I didn't hear anything." I could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hand trembled as he adjusted his coat. He turned quickly, hurrying down the stairs without another word. It was the same with the others. No one would talk to me, and no one would acknowledge the strange happenings. It was as if they were all keeping some dark secret, a secret they weren't willing to share. The whispers grew louder. One night, I heard them distinctly, clear as day. "Why won't you help us?" The voice sounded like it was coming from inside my own head, as if it was speaking directly into my thoughts. I dropped the glass I had been holding, the sound of it shattering on the floor, echoing in the empty apartment. The next day, something else happened. As I walked past the door to the vacant apartment, I saw something I couldn't explain. Shadows flickered beneath the door. Fast, erratic movements, as if someone was pacing inside. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. The apartment was supposed to be empty, but the shadows didn't lie. Something was in there. That evening, the air was thick with unease. The whispers had been growing louder, echoing through the walls like a chorus of desperate voices. Each night, the intensity of the sounds increased, as if something was urging me to do something. Or maybe something was trying to reach me. The power went out suddenly. One moment, everything was fine, and the next, the room was plunged into darkness. The low hum of the refrigerator ceased, and the usual whir of the radiator died away. Silence settled over the apartment, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I had grown used to. This was something more oppressive, something heavy, like the calm before a storm. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the hallway, my pulse quickening with every step. The familiar creak of the wooden floors beneath my feet echoed in the silence, and I tried not to think about the shadows I had seen under the vacant apartment door earlier that day. When I reached the door, I froze. The door to the vacant apartment, always locked, was now ajar. Just a crack, enough to spill a thin sliver of light into the hallway. The light flickered as though something was moving inside. I felt my heart race in my chest. There was no turning back now. I pushed the door open with trembling hands. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with the musty scent of decay and something darker, something foul. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor was littered with dust and broken furniture. But the real terror lay in the center of the room. The whispering, which had been faint and distant before, was now deafening. It seemed to come from all directions, swirling around me, pressing in on my mind. I could hear distinct words now, pleas, accusations, desperate cries for help. Suddenly the figures appeared. They flickered into existence before me, their forms pale and translucent. A man and a woman, their faces contorted in agony, their eyes wide with fear and rage. The woman's mouth was open as though screaming, but no sound came. The man stood beside her, his face twisted in anger, his hands clenched into fists. "You did this to me," the woman shrieked, her voice a rasping echo in the room. "You were the one who lied," the man shouted back, his voice cracking with fury. The argument between them escalated quickly, their voices blending into a chaotic mess of anger and sorrow. I staggered backward, my breath coming in short gasps, my mind spinning with the surreal reality of what I was seeing. The room seemed to tilt, as though the very air was turning against me. My head spun, and the world around me blurred. The voices, their words, grew louder, overwhelming, crashing into my ears like thunder. You're not real," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. But they were real. The cold, dead eyes that locked onto mine were real. The way their forms flickered and twisted, stretching and bending in unnatural ways, was real. The woman turned to me, her hollow eyes narrowing. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. I stumbled backward, terror clawing at my throat, but my feet wouldn't move fast enough. The man advanced, his face a mask of rage. "You shouldn't have come," he growled. I tried to speak, tried to apologize, but the words caught in my throat. I was paralyzed, unable to do anything except watch as they closed in on me. Their ghostly forms moved with unnatural speed, flickering as though they were both in front of me and behind me at once. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in. The air was thick with their anger, their sorrow, their pain. I turned and ran for the door. I grabbed the handle, pulling with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The door was stuck. Panic surged in my chest. I threw my weight against it, but the door held firm. The spirits were almost upon me now. The woman reached out with a skeletal hand, her fingers grazing my skin. "I didn't mean to," I gasped, tears welling up in my eyes. "I just wanted to leave. Please." But there was no mercy in their eyes. They lunged forward, their forms distorting as they reached for me. In a final, desperate move, I shoved my shoulder against the door, twisting the handle with every ounce of strength I had left. It gave way with a loud creak, and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that left my ears ringing. The building fell silent. The whispers stopped. The spirits were gone. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had barely escaped, but I knew, somehow, that they would never truly leave. The building, the apartment, would always hold their presence. It was only a matter of time before they came again. The next morning, everything was eerily quiet. The apartment was still, but it felt wrong, like a space held in stasis, a place where time had stopped. The door to the vacant unit was sealed shut, its once creaky hinges now completely silent. I knew, though, that the terror wasn't over. It never really is. I moved out that day. I didn't take much, just a few belongings, the essentials. I couldn't stay, not after what I had seen. The building, the walls, the very air felt like it was waiting for something. I knew that if I stayed, I would never leave. The whispers would find me, just like they had found the others before me. As I walked away, I turned one last time to look at the building. The windows were dark, The door closed. But for a moment, I thought I saw something. A shadow just behind the glass. A flicker of movement, the faintest hint of eyes watching me, waiting. I've been in a new place now for months, trying to push the memories from my mind. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. A faint whisper in the dark. It's always the same words. Why won't you help us? I don't know who they are, or why they still speak to me. But I've learned one thing. No matter how far I run, no matter how much time passes, the dead never truly leave. Some things are too powerful to escape. And the whispers, they'll always find me. They'll always find someone.